What's going on, everybody? This is MinisterCue. Welcome to the protocol. It's been a while, but I want to get straight to this because we are in a very critical time. For those of you who are watching, please stay tuned. I want you to see how this is broken down, and I want you to take notes because as much as we have been blessed and privileged to be American citizens, there's a lot happening, right? There's a lot of things happening politically. There's a lot of things happening religiously. There's a lot of things happening economically. When it all boils down to it, many of you have a livelihood. And when your livelihood is tampered with, it causes stress, it causes uncertainty, it causes anxiousness, worry. It can get very, very tremendous, and it can affect your health. But when we understand economics, when we have the wisdom that we need, we can make decisions that will better our future. And when I look around and I'm looking at how people shop around and I'm looking at how we manage our money as a whole, it's not looking good. So I want to play this video and I want you guys to take note, okay? Here we go.
So, right now, if you got Bruce is a guy who wears sunglasses. That's just who he is, man. Okay, if you got Bruce over there, right now, he is freaking out about inflation because his wallet is empty. And so Bruce is going.
And I do want to say this, regardless of anybody's political views, where they stand and who the figure is, my thing is this: whoever presents facts, that's all that matters to me. Facts is facts. We all should just want that. We all should desire facts. That's what it's about, okay?
Going to be living a life with his hands up to the sky, wondering what the heck happened. And that is exactly why Bruce is saying, let's go, Brandon. Alrighty, folks, today we are going to explain why inflation is out of control here in the United States. We're going to break it down along 3 axes. We're going to talk about supply chain problems. We're going to talk about government spending, and we're going to talk about monetary inflation via the Federal Reserve. This video is brought to you by our friends over at Birch Gold. By the way, this video is a pretty good reason why you might want to invest at least a little bit into precious metals. Okay, so why don't we begin with Joe Biden's big excuse, that is the supply chain. When the pandemic happened, factories everywhere shut down. It is much easier to shut down a factory, as it turns out, than to spin it back up. And the supply chains across the world are extraordinarily integrated in a way that they weren't for most of human history. So, for example, according to some surveys in 2019, nearly 100% of major companies said that they had some part of their supply chain located in China. Well, China had all of these jobs shipped over there, right, all the way over here, because they have very few labor regulations, because they have slave labor in some cases, they have no environmental regulations. So if you're going to create dye, for example, and then just dump the toxic waste into a river, you ain't going to do that in Europe. You're not going to do that in the United States. Wealthy.
I want you guys to take note of that. I remember being in conversations with individuals who think, let's just do all of what we need to do here in America. But if you understand international trade, it's very beneficial to work with these different nations for relationship purposes, business purposes. There are those of you who need to do business internationally. And then too, he just said something about like with the chemicals and different infrastructural work that's done. We don't really want that here in America. This may sound selfish, but we've been able to have some leverage in the way we do business. But I want him to finish, and I'll talk more about that. One moment. Take notes, because right now he's going to deal with the supply chain. He's going to kind of categorize this, and it's important for you guys to understand this, okay?
Nations can afford to care about the environment. China doesn't care, so China just pollutes up the wazoo. That means that if you're going to produce a manufactured good, then you are generally going to be doing that in China. If you're going to be doing innovation, if you're going to be doing service industry stuff, you're going to be doing that in the West. And as the supply chain starts to become longer and longer in order to account for.
And that's kind of fortunate. We have innovation ideas. God has blessed us in the West with great innovation ideas. You know, oftentimes people say, why do other nations deal with us? It's a few things. One, most importantly, I'll get to that later, God willing, but you should be thankful. Don't settle. Believe the gifts that God placed on the inside of you. Be innovative. That is something that I feel is being sucked out of people. Innovation.
Or the differences between labor supplies in different countries, you start to see massive integration between countries. Well, when something shuts down in China, that means that it's going to have an impact on whatever is the next factory that requires the input. There's a very famous essay called I, Pencil, came out in 1985, all about how a pencil is created. They take the most simple
This is a good analogy he's about to use, y'all.
object that you know of, and think about how many different countries this thing has had to go through in order to get to you. When you have a pencil, you have the little eraser. Where does the rubber come from? And you have the little metal piece. Where does that come from? You have the wood. Where is that coming from? You have the paint on the outside. Where's that coming from? You got the lead. Where's that coming from? Well, now take complex product like a car, and you're talking about maybe half a dozen or a dozen countries that the various parts have to come from in order to manufacture that. Well, you shut down not one factory, but many factories all at the same time because of COVID. It's going to be very difficult to spin that back up. So you're going to see a real shock in terms of the supply that is available to deal with the demand. Now, when the pandemic hit, what people were mostly concerned about is that demand would completely disappear and you get a worldwide depression because people just would not buy anything ever again. Nobody had a job, nobody had any money, nobody knew exactly what to do, and nothing like this had really happened in modern history before, certainly not on a global scale the way that this did.
Yeah.
And you combine that with the long tail of regulations that have existed in the West with, for example, the ports. So in the United States, the unions in the United States have bargained, particularly on the West Coast, to shut down the ports for certain numbers of hours per day. You have real problems with how containers fit on ships and what sort of containers fit on trucks and what happens if they can't fit into the ports properly. And so what you end up with is at every place in the supply chain, real delays. Let's say that you have a factory.
We don't know. And look, we want shipment to be as efficient as possible. What is up with the delays? I really feel like those policies or whatever that was put into place serves a grander scheme of things than what it appears to be. But that's a very good point that's being made here, because when we think about inflation, we gotta follow the rabbit hole. We gotta trace the domino effect of why these things happen. And the supply chain, in my opinion, is a strong indication of control. What can be used as a way to manipulate and control. You have the central banks, got the Fed, then you have the supply chain. As the saying goes, those who control the money controls the people. Those who controls the supply chain controls the people. Though, look.
In China, and it is manufacturing a product, and it has to make its way around over to India, where it's used as an input. And now it's going to get shipped to Brazil for another input. And then that is going to get shipped over to, say, the east coast of the United States, where it then has to travel across the country. If at every point here you have a delay, you're going to end up with a really, really big delay. One of the big shortages that's occurred here is in semiconductors, because it's difficult to produce semiconductors, because the technological innovation that is associated with semiconductors is largely in Eastern Asia. 92% of all advanced semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. Another 6% are produced over in South Korea.
92% are produced in Taiwan. Take note of this. You've been hearing about these rumors with China possibly wanting to take over Taiwan. Imagine if they do that, how much power and control they would have. Semiconductors, you guys, that we need, this commodity that we need as Americans. There's a chess game being played right now, you guys. And even as they are playing chess, you have to play chess with your finances. You have to really tap into the gifts that God placed on the inside of you. Because I'm going to get to that point. Where do your ideas come from? You have to tap into the wisdom of God. And you have to play chess according to the ideas that he give you. And you have to know how to invest. We're going to get there.
And when you have a shortage in semiconductors, that means that new cars become incredibly expensive. This is why no one can get a new car now. This is why used cars are pricing above new cars. So the problems of supply chains are very, very real. And to pretend they're not is, of course, very silly. To also pretend, as Joe Biden did, that he can just get the ports working 24 hours a day and that fixes it, obviously is not going to do it. But if this were just a supply chain issue, then again, it would apply to Europe the same as it's applying to the United States. And it doesn't. Which brings us to issue number 2. how the United States decided to spend during this pandemic. And the answer is we spent more money than anyone has ever seen in the history of humanity. If you draw a chart of the national debt of the United States, here is what it's going to look like.
So from supply chain to how America regulates the money and how we regulate money, how we manage money. This right here is very important.
Okay. Then 2021 happens, the pandemic, and our national debt
Ridiculous.
is now off the chart. It's gone. Okay,
That's
so
crazy.
in the past year and a half, we added about $7 trillion to the national debt. From 2020 to 2021, we added $7 trillion to the national debt. We spent more money than has ever been seen by God or man. The idea was that the federal government was going to pay everybody to stay home. They were going to pay them hundreds of dollars per week to stay home. That lasted all the way from March 2020 all the way until September of 2021. These extended unemployment benefits, for example. What did this do? It told people, why don't you just stay home? People did. People who were working took the money and they pocketed it. By the
One moment, guys. I think I had made the screen too big. There we go. So y'all can see his face. All right.
end of the pandemic, people had more money in the bank, more wealth in the bank than they had at the beginning of the pandemic, while many of them were not working. We also suspended mortgages. We suspended rents. We did all of these things. We blew out the spending in extraordinary, extraordinary ways. We did all of this while producing no product. So it was helicopter money. We just dropped money on millions and hundreds of millions of people, while simultaneously putting small businesses out of business by telling people they couldn't go to a restaurant. They couldn't go to a small mom and pop store. You could go to a big chain store because after all, you had to shop.
That's the ridiculous part that happened during the pandemic. Really, I hope you're really taking this in, you guys. I hope you're really taking this in. When we consume more than we produce, that's a problem. They inflated this economy so heavily from 2020 to where we are now. And during the pandemic, they inflated it so much. Look, I know there are those of us who enjoyed that stimulus check because we felt like we could leverage with it. But those who were wise, see, the key is, what were you doing with the stimulus? Were you concerned about splurging? Were you concerned about trying to impress other people with your materialistic ways? Because many Americans, if not most, were recklessly spending that money. But who was willing to take risks and invest? Were you willing to learn about ways to invest and looking at the bigger picture? But if you were more concerned about the right now, then that's a problem. And with the mom and pop stores, remember how they was telling us we needed to wear we couldn't go to the mom and pop stores, these smaller restaurant chains, these smaller gatherings of people in these mom and pop stores where they forced that you either have to wear a mask or you couldn't go at all. So what did that do? That caused the businesses to suffer. Middle class people who just trying to get ahead to suffer, and many lost their business because of that. But yet you can go to the bigger supply chains, the bigger corporations, where people still are around each other with or without a mask. That's crazy. And it's caused a big problem. There was a ripple effect.
But you couldn't go to like a small mom and pop store. So all those places went out of business, but here's a check to compensate you for your trouble. So what are you doing? That's much more money chasing much less product. What does that do? That creates inflation. So that's factor number 2, which is how much money the government spent. This also means that if Bruce is looking at future inflation, and Bruce is also looking for maybe just a little bit of that hard asset that has never been worth zero, gold, from our good friends over at Birch. One way that people have historically protected against the predations of the market and inflation has been precious metals. 40 years ago, Ronald Reagan saw massive inflation unlike
Obviously, they don't sponsor me, but again, the facts are the facts. Guys, get some gold. If you can invest in some gold, if you can learn how to invest in gold in whatever capacity, I'm not your financial advisor, but gold has always been the commodity throughout history. Shoot, look at even biblical times. Gold was always that hard asset, safe haven, in times of financial strain and recession. You know, there are other assets that you will want to invest in, but that's between you. Look, just do your research, okay? I don't care that he's making a plug right here, because at the end of the day, we need wisdom on how to invest.
Like anything the country had seen before, that's super high inflation. We're talking like 10%, 15%, 20% inflation. And now, in Reagan's own words, inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, as deadly as a hitman. Right now, your retirement accounts are under attack thanks to the inflationary policies of this administration. So if you haven't yet called Birch Gold, I'm asking you, why not? Those are the people I trust to help you diversify your 401k and IRA into gold. Birch Gold has your life vest against the rising waters. Let them help you convert an IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. With thousands of satisfied customers and A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, you can trust Birch Gold to protect your savings. Text BEN to 989898. Get a free information kit on gold today. And for a limited time, when you buy, Birch Gold will send you a signed copy of my brand new book, The Authoritarian Moment. Text BEN to 989898 to get your free information kit right now. Next, and finally, we get to the activity of the Federal Reserve under Jerome Powell and company. So these big boys come in and they decide, you know what? We need to not only temporarily backstop the economy, we need to just superheat the economy. So you understand at the very beginning that the Federal Reserve, which had not experienced, as we say, serious inflation in the United States for 40 years, the idea of inflation had become sort of a thing of the past, so much so that there were people on the left who were suggesting that there was something called modern monetary theory. You could literally spend as much money as you could possibly want, and it would do no damage. You would not get major inflation. You would never have to pay it off. It would be totally fine, right? This was an actual viable theory.
You would never have to pay it off. It'll be totally fine. But what is it backed up by? What is this fiat paper backed up by?
Like 2 years ago, Elizabeth Warren was promoting it. Okay, now it becomes clear that we've got this over here. Okay, so what did Jerome Powell do? He made a mistake. He thought that if there was inflation, it would be temporary. Because after all, the demand that he had artificially created would eventually be met by the supply. And now that relied on a couple of things. One, it relied on actual solving of the supply chain problem, which we've discussed before. But also, it relied on the idea that things weren't being overvalued simply by the fact that there was so much money swimming around in the economy. Okay, so the basic idea here is that the lending rate to the banks was zero, right? It was free. It was free for the banks to lend each other money and for the banks to borrow money from the federal. All that was zero. Okay, so
Question: what is the best e-commerce business to start today? Is it drop shipping from China and selling on Shopify? Long delivery?
Okay, so what that did is it led to an enormous amount of the bank taking out money and then investing in products that they wouldn't normally invest in. So, for example, Carnival Cruises goes down, right? $6 billion. There's $6 billion on its stock price because the cruises are going to be shut down for a couple of years. And instead of Carnival going bankrupt, basically the Federal Reserve tells the banks, we will back your play. So the Federal Reserve starts buying up assets like never before in human history. The Federal Reserve is currently holding $9 trillion in assets. $9 trillion in assets. Okay, they do this by buying up all sorts of product from the bank and then injecting a bunch of money to the banks, which the banks then lend out at very low rates of interest. This spurs demand.
And really take note of that, you guys. Think about it. They get assets. They begin to own real assets in exchange for paper money to inflate our economy, spending more, consuming more than what we're actually producing. And he's going to just look.
It spurs investment. It means that you're going to get an inflated stock market bubble. You get an inflated real estate bubble. But Jerome Powell kept saying that the inflation was temporary. The supply chains would clear up. The overspending would eventually kind of work its way out. And the market is sort of like a bump in a snake moving back toward the rear of.
It's going to work itself out. Anybody who knows the truth, any economist out there who knows the truth, such inflation, especially knowing the history behind all this, it doesn't work. The debt becomes too much, and who has to pay it? That's the question. Who has to pay it? Who does it all fall on? You have these other nations who don't want to deal with our currency anymore, forming unions elsewhere because there's bad business being done behind the scene.
The snake, and eventually everything would clear out. Well, the problem is that the combination of all of these factors, buying up $9 trillion in assets and sending all this cash into the system, which is then being distributed out to a business and being distributed out to a mortgage and being distributed out to an individual, right? All that money that's out there is then inflating all the pricing. So bottom line is what you end up with is a three.
It inflates the prices. I want y'all to know this. It inflates the prices. You be wondering why is this product prices going up? Because the supply is short and the demand is high. It's so much demand. We have this amount of money that's been inflated into the economy, right? You go and get your favorite products, and it seems like good business for the corporations at first. But then when they run out of the products, now they're thinking we need supply. And remember, we're just talking about the supply chain, that category of this video. You hear me? If the rapport is not fast enough to meet the demand, prices go up. It goes up when the supply is not there. Then the Fed had to step back in and start boosting interest rates. Get to that.
Factor disaster area that leads to long-lasting inflation. Factor number one, supply chain. Factor number two, overspending.
There we go.
Factor number three, the Fed. Okay, that combo is going to create superheated inflation, which is why you see it in the US, but you don't really see it as much over in Europe. So when Joe Biden says it's just the supply chain, that's not correct. It's overspending, it's the Fed. It's not just me saying this. It's former Obama administration Undersecretary of the Treasury, Stephen Ratner. Okay, it's Larry Summers. This is not merely a supply chain phenomenon. It is also overspending, it's also the Fed, which is why when Joe Biden says what we really, really need to do is spend more money, all he's doing is making this worse. When he says, what if we had the Fed continue to set the rates really, really low? All that is doing is making this worse. Now, to Jerome Powell's credit, and to the credit of the Federal Reserve, they're now trying to bring this down, right? They're going to try to divest themselves of those $9 trillion in assets. They're going to raise the overnight interest rates in order to ensure that less money goes into the system. They're going to try and suck money out of the system and put those assets back into the system. Okay, all of that is going to lower the phenomenon of monetary inflation. There's only one really big problem in the long run. Supply chains will iron themselves out. They will. There's one really big problem, and that one's this one. Okay, the fact is, that one ain't going away. That's not going away, as we suggested.
He says they will iron themselves out. I told y'all about a chess game being played. It's like the black market of the Wall Street. There are those who are willing to tell the truth. Though you have some of your major banks telling you everything is okay. You hear me? You have certain other institutions saying, everything is okay. The Fed definitely going to say everything is okay. But why is it that I think 81% of CEOs, 81% of CEOs across America say with a very high percent that they see recession coming? What do they know that we don't know? What do they know that we don't know? Time will tell.
When you have $30 trillion in national debt, that means the interest payments on the debt are going to comprise an enormous chunk of your budget in future years. It means you're going to have to raise taxes. It means you're going to have to pay people back somehow. Okay, how are you going to do that? The answer is probably economic stagnation. That's what I am afraid of. I'm not as concerned about inflation being a long-lasting phenomenon. It'll get cleared up. Might take a year, might take 2 years. But in the end, what we did here is we completely reshaped the nature of the economy in the United States. We made ourselves way more dependent on the government. Not only did we make ourselves way more dependent on the government, we spent more money than has ever been spent in human history. We've set a new baseline on what kind of things we will spend money on. If that continues, you're going to see low growth from here out into the future.
That's a problem. And there are those of you who don't quite understand that. You might look at this or hear this as some type of right-wing rhetoric. No, this is simply economics. Macroeconomics is important. And when you are able to not have the bias of any political party, but simply see the facts on the money, then you will begin to understand why there are certain ones pushing certain policies anyway. We as Americans, we have a financial management problem. We have a greed problem, a materialistic problem, and it has consequences and repercussions. It has consequences and repercussions that are soon to come if this mental psychology do not change. There has to be a paradigm shift. There has to be a conviction, especially for those of you who really care about your children's future. The next year or two, y'all, I don't see it being bright. Not for those of you who don't have the wisdom on how to manage your finances. You don't have the discipline on how to cut back on the expenses. And most importantly, you don't have God. Because to be quite frank with you, when you think about those who've been entrusted with these leadership positions, have they done a great job? The ones you thought who gave you promises, and now those promises have been broken. Many of you bright students who've been to college took out great loans, and it gave you great debt. And you thought, man, I would get some relief here, but did it happen? Was that promise fulfilled? You understand? Credit card debt is high, it's to the roof. Not always because it's your fault, but because now the interest is high. It's like, how are we or you going to pay that? Right? But just like we want those in leadership position to look in the mirror and examine themselves, we also have a problem. And that problem is a deep-rooted problem. It's a sin problem, a greed problem, a perverted problem, the way you see money problem, the way you see giving problem.
That's the real danger. So as inflation clears up, watch for stagnation to set in.
So again, I know there are those of you who don't care about this media, whatever, but my thing is this. I don't care where a person may stand politically. Facts are facts. Facts are facts. So you might ask, what do we do? What you do is you get right. You get wisdom. And how do you do that? Well, first and foremost, we talk about investments. But I'm going to tell you the most important goal to invest in. Let me share that with you. So the first thing I want to read to you is this. In Proverbs 20:15, there is gold and a multitude of rubies, but the lips of knowledge are a precious jewel. What you just heard were the lips of knowledge. The lips of knowledge is a precious jewel. Okay? Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and love and favor rather than silver and gold. And I'm going to get the last scripture. Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like the apples of gold in pitchers of silver. So you hearing this wisdom spoken, you hearing these precious gems being shared to give you understanding of what's going on right now economically. But I want you to know that God wants you to know from the wisdom of Proverbs, it says a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. First and foremost, we have to deal with you and I, all of us, having integrity before God, having a good character before God. Because when we think about leaders that you have voted for, you and I and others of us voted for, if those leaders have not been displaying character, wisdom out of their lips, out of their behavior, it just may be a reflection of you and I. Are you examining yourself before God so that you can truly understand what it means to have a good name, so that you could truly understand what it means to have wisdom. But this is Revelation 3:8. You know, the Bible says that the book of Revelation blesses those who read it. God blesses those who read the book of Revelation because we're close to that unveiling itself in these last days. But this is what God says in Revelation 3:18. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. Now you thinking to yourself, what are you saying? Do I need to purchase gold? And how do I purchase gold from God? What does he mean by that I may be rich? Why is he speaking about white garments? Because when you study this passage in context, here you had people who out of their mouth and their profession claim to know God, claim to have a relationship with God. But they got so comfortable. They were so blessed. They were so spoiled with the blessings, material things that they are obtaining, that they begin to assume that they must be doing something right simply because of the material things they had, simply because of the riches of this world that they had. And they thought, we must be godly. We must be right in God's eyes. And God is saying no, because I see that you have issues in your heart of greed, idolatry, materialism. And he's saying, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, meaning you are more precious to me than those material things. And in order for me to develop your character, these trials and tribulations that come your way is to refine you, just like gold put in the fire. That is truly valuable to me. You are my gold. And my goal is to refine you that you may truly be purified and made whole. White garments represent being pure. You have all of these clothes and Gucci outfits, Versace this and Jordan's this, and all these expensive stuff that you think makes you godly, that you think makes you righteous because you're being praised from people. But he's saying, no, let me put on you what true garments is. Let me put on you the right type of garment that in my eyes, I see you as right. Let me clothe you. Then we have in Isaiah 55:1. Isaiah 55:1. God is saying this to you. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. God is not looking for your materials. You can't pay for the salvation that he has to offer you. You can't. You cannot pay for the salvation that only God can give you. You have to see having God and his wisdom as more precious and valuable, which is why we have in the last scripture I'm going to share, Matthew 13:44, it says this: the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Wow. I hope you really take note of that, you guys. Because when you truly value a relationship with God and you desire the kingdom of heaven and you see its value, it's like, he used an example of how men are on this earth, that when they come across something value, whether it be gold, a gold mine, a field where they realize there are precious minerals in that field, and they understand that it's that so valuable that they'll be willing to hide it and then get all of the tools that they need to dig up the ground to get a hold of that precious mineral or gold. These individuals understand value. How much more should you understand value in your relationship with God? How much should you understand value in your relationship with God? That's what he's concerned about. That's what's most important to him. You see, you guys, Jesus never lied. He was always consistent with truth. And when he comes back, you guys, he's going to judge the world in righteousness. And if you're not in right standing with God and have his wisdom, how will you survive the time that's coming where people are going to be going crazy? You see the riots that have transpired the last few years. Just to show you with that little of what people were willing to do. With the injustices they've seen. But when it hits the people's personal home and their pockets, things get very extreme. But when your faith is in Christ, he will substantiate and protect you and provide for you in times where it seems like the markets are haywire and not doing good. I do pray that your heart gets right with God so that you can have the wisdom of God on how to be financially secure in the time to come. But as I read those scriptures, true value is a relationship with him. So with that being said, God bless you guys. Hit the like and subscribe button. And until next time, follow the protocol. God bless.